want to hand over to Tom. He can introduce himself more fully and then get on with the demonstration. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Pat. So, for those of you who do not know me, my name is Tom Windross. I'm a 16-year-old, home-educated, aspiring wood turner from County Waterford. I've always had an interest in wood, and my wood turning journey began 4 years ago, when I received a lathe for Christmas. I started with spindle work to gain confidence around the lathe, and then moved towards bowl turning. At the moment, I'm particularly interested in working with green wood, and I appreciate how its natural movement and tension influence the final form, as I do allow for warping to occur as each piece dries. I also like to sometimes enhance these pieces, so I'm going to be covering several different surface enhancement techniques today. These include fuming with ammonia, alkaline liming, and ebonising wood using various different methods. Here are a couple of my more recent pieces. So we have a piece of oak that has been fumed with ammonia and has then had a verdigris wax applied into the grain. And this has a lovely drunken bottom, so it spins around and it rolls around in your hand. It also fits very nicely in your hand. I have a piece of home oak, which I have textured. This is inspired by a calabash bowl, so again it's rounded on the bottom. I have an oak vessel, and this is what I started out making. This is an oak vessel that has been distorted at the top using a clamp, and then has been fumed with the ammonia. And finally, we have this vessel. And this is a piece of oak again. I quite enjoy working with oak, and it's been limed, and then it's had some scorching as well. And we have a beaded vessel as well that has been fumed with ammonia. And I can pass these around. You can have a look at them, and I will be covering the techniques to get this lovely dark appearance.
Tell me, do you use liquid ammonia or gas?
I use liquid ammonia. I'll be showing you exactly how I fume a piece and the ammonia that I use in the second half of the demo. For the first half, I'm going to be turning the bowl, and for the second half, I'll cover the surface enhancement techniques. So since joining the Irish Wood Turning Guild, everyone I've met in my wood turning has been so friendly and kind. So I'd like to thank you all for all your support. I was recently awarded the Irish Wood Turning Guild bursary, and I used the funds to attend the AAW Symposium in North Carolina in June. This was an amazing event. There was hundreds of wood turners. There was amazing demonstrations, as well as several thousand pieces on display in the instant gallery over there. And it really was an eye-opening experience. If anyone has the opportunity to attend the event, I'd recommend doing so. It really was fantastic. And likewise with the wood turning bursary. Feel free to ask any questions as I'm demonstrating, and it'll only help me along. And can everyone hear me all right? Yeah, perfect. So today I'm going to be demonstrating this chestnut bowl, and then in the second half I'm going to demonstrate how to ebonize, fume with ammonia, and alkali treat this piece. This chestnut bowl has a nice closed form, so it fits nicely in your hands. And I think this is one of the most important things with a bowl. It has to fit nicely in your hands, as well as looking pretty. This is turned out of dry wood, however the piece I'll be demonstrating today is green timber. And you can then distort the green timber to create an oval shape. I'm very fortunate that all of my timber that I use comes from the estate where my father works. He's a gardener in a country house estate, so there's always loads of trees, and they're always blowing down. There's a good sized plantation of these 30-year-old Spanish chestnut trees, so getting hold of this block of timber is very, very easy for me. Chestnut is a very good wood to use, as it reacts very, very well with different chemicals. And this is because it is high in tannins. Oak and chestnut are really high in tannins, so react really, really well. So I'm going to turn this bowl now, and then I'll go on to the surface enhancement techniques. So before I start turning, I'll cover safety. As I'm turning a piece of green timber, there will naturally be less dust, as the wood is moist. However, there is the possibility of exposure to tannin, moisture-carrying bacteria, and spores. All of these things could lead to problems, such as dermatitis, which is skin inflammation or itchiness, respiratory problems, and nasal congestion. So to reduce these risks, I always wear a face shield, safety glasses, a mask, and also barrier cream for my hands. As I am microphoned up, I do not have my face shield, but I do have my prescription safety glasses. So to mount this piece of chestnut on the lathe, I'm using an 8mm worm screw.
I'm sick already. Excuse me.
So I'm just going to hand twist it on and make sure it's nipped up very tight. And I'm going to slide the tailstock forward so that I have extra support. I use the tailstock as much as I can where possible. If it gets in the way, I'll move it away. So the first thing I'm going to do is true up this blank, and then I will turn a tenon on the bottom, which will be turned away at the end. Then I'll turn the outside shape, and then hollow out the piece. I'm going to be using a Simon Hope bowl gouge today. I find these Hope chisels are very good, as they hold a good edge, and I find it relatively easy to sharpen. Another great thing is they're double-ended tools. So on one end here, we have the fingernail grind, and on the other end, we have the straight grind. And this is really, really handy. I need one tool to do this whole bowl. I can do this whole bowl with this one tool, but I will use a couple of different ones to show you. And you can also use longer handles. Here I have the longer handle, and this is a lot heavier. And I will use this when I'm roughing out bowls and want to minimize the vibration. But for a piece this size, the smaller handle will be fine for today. So I don't have any rings or watches on my hands, and I'm wearing a short sleeve t-shirt so that I don't get caught up in the lathe. And I say at home, I wear my face shield, but for today I have my safety glasses. I stand outside of the firing line of the piece, and I start the lathe at a slow speed, and then slowly increase the speed. So there we're at 1200 RPM, and I'll just take a cut to true up this blank, and then turn the tenon. This is very green timber. This is measuring around 20 to 25% moisture. So you can see the sap already coming out of the timber, and it will turn everything almost black. So I hope you don't mind if your lane's black at the end. I'll clean it off. And this is because the tannins are immediately coming out of the timber and reacting with the metal of the tool rest and the tool. So the next step is to turn our tenon. And I'm going to use my calipers to scribe a line for the diameter of my tenon. I'm using 35mm gripper jaws, so I want a tenon of about 37mm. And this just means that the jaws close down perfectly round, giving the most grip to the piece. So using one point, the left-hand point of the calipers, I scribe a line in. And I want to make sure that the tool rest is on centre height. And I'll just use a pencil so that you can all see that line. So using the bowl gouge, I'll waste some material away here, and then using the skew, I'll create a clean tenon. You can see the lovely long wood shavings, beautiful green wood. So now I will use the skew, and I will lay the skew flat on the tool rest to create the tenon. This tenon does not need to be dovetailed, as they are gripper jaws. If it was a dovetailed tenon, they would not grip evenly. So I'll raise up the tool rest slightly, and just lay the skew flat to create our tenon.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you earlier. Is your base?
It will be. I like to keep the base somewhere around a third of the diameter, and this is for stability. If I'm going to put sugar in the bowl, I want it to sit level on the table and not rock over. If it is going to be more of an artistic piece, like, I don't know whether you've seen some of Emmett Kane's pieces, but the bases are so small. An artistic piece can sometimes take a smaller base, and it can elevate the piece slightly. But for today, I work on around 1/3 of the overall diameter for the base. And I don't know whether you can see, but the tool rest is already black, and this is from the tannins. And my hands will be black at the end of the demo. And just bring up the tool rest before we start working on the outside shape. So I'm after a slightly closed form. So I work up to about 1/3 of the way from the top to waste away this material, and then I'll pull down from the top to create that nice closed form shape. And I like closed form bowls. They're a lot more challenging to do, especially when you get to hollow them out, but they fit really, really nicely in your hands. So I'm going to waste away some material, and then I'll talk you through the cuts that I'm doing. So there we've got the determined size of the base, and I'm going to be using 3 different cuts to turn the outside of this piece. They are the push cut, the pull cut, and the shear scrape. Now I'll start by using the push cut, and then flip around to the straight grind on the hub tool. And for the push cut, I'm working uphill into the timber. And the tip of the tool stays ahead of the handle, so I'm pushing the tool through the workpiece. And this gives a very, very, very clean finish. It has very, very good bevel contact, and that's why it's such a clean finish. So you see the very, very clean finish. There's no torn grain on that. And you will notice rings starting to happen on your piece. And this is where the moisture of the timber is coming out, and where the tool rests for even a second longer, you'll end up with a ring. But this will just come out with sanding. It only really happens on green wood, where it's full of moisture, and the moisture is coming out. So the second cut that I'm going to use is the pull cut. And I'll use this to waste away the top of the bowl to create that closed form shape. And I flip around to the fingernail grind on the bowl gouge. And the pull cut, I pull the tool through the workpiece so that handle is in front of the tip of the tool. So I'm pulling the tool through the workpiece. And this will just create that lovely closed form shape. So this tool is ground at 55 degrees, and I can do pretty much everything with this tool, and same with the fingernail, or the straight grind, that again is ground at 55 degrees. And I find this works for me personally. You can all have your own different grinds, and they only work for you. But this is just what I use, and it works for me. So the final cut that I'm going to use is the shear scrape. And this, when taken very slowly and gently, could remove any torn grain on the piece. So this cut is taken very, very gently. And I want to lower the tool rest down, because I want to have a 45-degree tool cutting angle. So the tool is presented very, very, very low. And I'm just cutting with the wing of the tool, and I'm actually going to swap for the larger fingernail grind. And this is because it has a longer wing. For all the proportions are the same, it has a big long wing there. So I find it's easier to use the half-inch tool. So I want to have the tool as low as possible, in nearly at my knee. And you can see the very, very fine wood shavings. I'm just really, really lightly touching the timber, and it produces very, very fine wood shavings. So look at this.
Sorry, would sandpaper not just take off, staying that you're taking off?
In nearly wood, it's very, very fine, but if there is torn grain, it's easier to take one pass with the tool, and it takes a lot of practice to do such a fine cut, and I still haven't mastered it. But I could spend 5 minutes sanding, or like a second with a tool, and it has it quickly removed. So unless I'm going in with like 80 grit, or 100 grit. So you can see the different cuts we were doing. You can tell them by the wood shavings. So the coarser wood shavings I used for the push cut, and I use this to waste away the bulk of the material on this piece. And if it was an open form bowl, so that that I find slightly easier to do. I would use the push cut only, as I can get a really good push cut around the bowl. But because there's clovings at the top, I'm going against the grain of the timber, if that makes sense. So I use the pull cut, and this produces finer wood shavings. And then finally, there's the sandpaper shavings. Is very, very, very fine shavings. And these are from the shear scrape. And this gives a fantastic finish to the wood, and is, when done with a very sharp tool, gives a very, very good finish. And you see they're very, very lightened. Very, very clean. So this piece is now ready to flip around, and I can start hollowing it out. Are we all happy with the shape of this piece? I'm happy with it. I hope the crowd is. So I can remove the tailstock. And you will see, can you see the black ring on the top of this piece on the camera? This is caused by the tannins in the wood. And the tannins are reacting with the metal of the jaw, and that's why it's turning black. This happens with the bedways and the tool rest. And that's why we need those tannins, because they react with the chemicals. Sorry. So I just want to make sure it's good and tight in the chuck. And
you mentioned chestnut and oak. Are there any others that have high tannin? Cherry.
Cherry is high in tannins. Oak and chestnut are very high in tannins. And I will show you how you can treat the wood artificially and add those tannins to the piece. But the easiest way is to use an oak or a chestnut. Some other woods have tannins, or all woods nearly have tannins, but it's just a concentration of them. And the oak and chestnut are just really high in those tannins.
Do you have to tighten the jaws periodically? Because the wood is green, when you're cutting the inside, after you've done a bit, do you tighten again?
I don't tend to. I usually find the grip fairly true and it doesn't loosen.
It doesn't get...
No, it doesn't. But so when hollowing, I want the tool to be cutting on the centre height. So you just put the tool on. And when hollowing out this piece, I'm going to use the straight grind on the chisel. So this end here. And I'm aiming for a wall thickness of somewhere around 4 to 5 millimeters. That's probably very thin for today, maybe a bit too ambitious. But with my green turn pieces, they have to be very thin so that they can warp in the start. There we have it. This piece I cut in half, and you see is that kind of 4 or 5 millimeters at the top, and then going into a base of 6 millimeters. And that's what I'm aiming for. As I say, probably won't get that thin today. But I can pass this around. Stop and move the wood shavings out of the way. So this is the problem with closed form bowls, that the wood shavings tend to build up inside of them, especially if turning green wood. Here on the end grain of the piece, on the outside, you can see the sap coming out. And this tree was only cut, I think, 3-4 weeks ago, so it's full of moisture. And this is where the sap's coming out, and again on the other side, on the end grain. And the chestnut is relatively quick growing. As I say, these were about 30-year-old trees, and they keep blowing down. They're always blowing down. And they use them they're looking to put them into the whiskey barrels, to make the whiskey barrels out of them. So I think there's a plantation of a good couple of 100 trees, and they're only looking for about 30 trees at the end, 30 straight grown chestnut trees. So there's a lot of trees blowing down. And you can see the lovely green, yellow colour of the chestnut and very clean grain. So I'll continue hollowing out this piece. And this is just a push cut when I'm hollowing out. And one little trick that I do have is to use the skew. And I'm just going to put a little groove in the rim here to determine the thickness. And this will just stop the bowl gouge from possibly skating across the piece. As we all know, if it skates across, the whole piece is ruined. So I'm going to put 2 small grooves in with the skew, and this will prevent that from happening. And you can just see the moisture there again on the end grain. And I can feel it on my hands. My hands are starting to turn slightly black. But you see the lovely big long wood shavings, and that's what we're after when we're hollowing. Especially green wood, a sharp tool, and speed. You get fantastic wood shavings and a fantastic clean finish. And this is really great fun up here, turning these big long wispy shavings. And when I'm checking the wall thickness, I tend to use my fingers more than I would use a calipers, especially on a piece this small. If it was a larger piece, I would use calipers. A set of calipers here, but for something this small.
Could you just explain to me the two grooves you did before you finished the whole out?
So the 2 grooves were put in with the skew,
Yeah.
and I just put those grooves in, and it stops the ball gouge from skating.
Not skating backwards.
Yeah, so if I didn't, there's a fear this is just going straight across, and then I'd get a massive catch.
Sitting the head of the...
Just putting the tip of the skew in, the point of the skew,
Yeah.
and to create a groove, and then put the ball gouge in, and
It sits in that.
Or shelf and a
yeah, the shelf. So I can demonstrate again. So we just have that tiny little groove there, inside the piece. Just here, on the edge there, just there.
Oh, okay, right.
And then when I put the ball gouge in, I put the ball gouge in like that,
Oh, okay.
so then it doesn't skate across the piece. And I've had so many pieces that have happened, so for this reason I prefer to put that little groove in.
Does it define the thickness of the wall?
It does. I define the thickness of the wall, so if I'm going for 3 or 4 millimeters, I'll put that groove in, and then there's no fear of this tool skating. And it just saves me ruining the piece, possibly. A little step, yeah. Step or groove. And I'm only working down to about halfway down this piece, and then I stop the cut. And this is because warping can occur as the piece has been turned, because it is full of moisture. This top, if I left it for even an hour or so, it'd come back to it, and it wouldn't be running through anymore. And again, all that moisture coming out of the piece on the end grain. So we're getting a good wall thickness there. For a second, I'm going to talk about some of the inspiration behind some of my pieces. Now, I have a collection of pieces over there, and some of them are inspired by the shapes of the late Liam Flynn. Now, I never met Liam, but his book, Fluid Forms, is a great source of inspiration. And a really interesting book. And another great place that I've been for inspiration towards the shapes of my pieces, thank you very much, is the National History Museum in Dublin. We're in Dublin. And this was a brilliant place. I was there for the interview, for the bursary, and after the interview, there was all the old bronzeware pots. And it's a great place to have a look around and see some of the old forms and the old shapes that have stood the test of time. And there's great ideas from my wood turning. So we're going to continue hollowing this out. We're nearly there. And I'm going to switch to fingernail grind on the ball gouge. And I use the fingernail grind more so on the bottom of the bowl. And this is because the wings are ground out of the way in theory. It doesn't have those pointy wings of the straight grind. They're out of the way, so they're not going to catch on the piece. So I use the fingernail grind for the bottom of the bowl. And just always stop the lathe and clear the wood shavings out. Never stick your fingers inside the moving piece, or never stick anything else inside that as it is spinning. There we go. That's all hollowed out. Now it's not the best hollowing, but it's not bad. It's not quite the 4 or 5 millimeters that I would be after. It's maybe 5 or 6 millimeters, but I think that'll be enough for today. I'm aiming for that really thin wall thickness so that the pieces do not crack as they dry. These thin vessels, if they're turned thin, they will not crack. If they're turned thick, there's still that moisture in them, and then they won't be able to move as much as something turned thin. So does anyone have any questions? I'm going to flip this around and put it on a jam chuck.
So you say the thinner it is, the more likely it is to move.
The more likely it is to move.
So a thicker one will not move.
The thicker pieces will not move, and if they do move, they're going to crack. Whereas a thin piece like this is, I'd say maybe 3-4 millimeters. I did distort it using a strap. And this gets this oval shape. And I have some better pieces at home, but this is an ebonized home oak vessel. And you can see the distortion in the top. And when turned very thin, out of green wood, you can get that distortion without cracking.
You do that in one turn, I guess.
Sorry?
Do it in one go.
One go, yeah. I always make sure if I'm hollowing out a piece like this, I want to get it finished from start to finish. If I leave it on the lathe for even a couple of hours, if I go in for dinner or something, it's going to come back to it and it's going to be running all out of true.
What's the maximum or minimum thickness that you would do to prevent it cracking?
So the maximum that I would do would be 6 millimeters for the thickness. I'm aiming for as thin as possible. If I can get it down to those 4 or 5 millimeters, that's perfect. I know it's not going to crack. And it does depend on the piece. But I'm aiming for 4 millimeters ideally, but not today. But we've got a nice piece there. So I'm going to use a jam chuck.
If you're using softer wood,
Softer.
you can't go as, you can't.
No, you'd end up blowing out. I tend to work in hardwoods, especially oak and chestnut, and also home oak. This is because they react well with the chemicals. I tend to not do my green pieces out of softer woods. And this is just because I don't have a lot of access to soft timbers. I have a lot of oak, I have a lot of chestnut, and it's easy for me to get hold of.
In the computer plant, we got marks, black marks. And the other one said you chemicals using iron filings.
Oh yes, I will be demonstrating that later on, how to ebonize using iron acetate solution. That's using the vinegar and the iron filings that creates that nice dark appearance. So this is just a scrap piece of timber, and I just put a jam chuck on it. So just and then using the skew, I'll create the chamfer edge for the jam chuck. So that's a little bit loose. I can use the kitchen paper towel, and this will just jam it up. And I'm going to use the tailstock anyway. So. So I'm going to put the tailstock, up against that. And that's going nowhere. It's over the jam chuck, and I have the paper towel just to make it tight. I'll just tear this up so it's not flying around. That's running nice and true. So to remove the tin, I use a spindle gouge, and this is just because it's nice and small, and we'll get in there to remove it. Do go very careful with the spindle gouge when using it on a bowl, so I take very, very light cuts when doing this. And I want to undercut the base slightly, just so it sits level on whatever it's sitting on. It be a table or something. It wants to be slightly undercut. So when it does warp, I can give it a light sand on the base, and it will sit level. Now I'm not going to remove all of that material. I will use a skew, and I'll take this piece out of the jam chuck and then just remove that little nub there. You could use a carving chisel or something and just take away that nub. And then I would sand the base of this piece. And when sanding green wood is a lot more challenging than sanding than sanding dry wood. And this is because it's wet. It's going to clog up the sandpaper so easily. So I do use a hot air gun to slightly dry the surface of the timber. And this just prevents the wood from clogging, or from the sandpaper clogging up so easily. And then to sand the piece, I'd work through grits of 120, 180, 240, and then ending on 320 to give a nice smooth finish. And for this is a lovely little chestnut bowl. For the second part of this demonstration, after tea break, I'll go through the different surface enhancement techniques that you could use to alter the colour of this piece. So they are the fuming with ammonia, the colouring using the alkaline substances, as well as ebonising using various different methods. But if we're all happy here, we can have a tea break, if that suits you. Does that suit everyone? Yeah, it's not the best, but it's all right. Thanks, Pat. So, welcome back, everyone. I hope you all had a nice tea break. For the second part of this demonstration, I'm going to talk you through and show you some different surface enhancement techniques. These techniques include fuming with ammonia, liming wood using alkali substances, and finally ebonising using various different techniques. We will see how time goes as to how in depth we get into each topic. All of the surface enhancement techniques are relatively simple. But before I talk you through how I do them, I must cover the safety precautions.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah?
What sort of safety precautions do you take when you do liquid ammonia?
So, do not spill any chemicals on yourself.
Say again?
Do not spill any chemicals on yourself.
But it's the vapor on top.
I always wear a mask, a P3 face mask, to prevent inhaling any fumes. And I always work in a well-ventilated area.
It'll knacker your eyes.
Okay.
It has a accumulation of moisture, so it'll make you dry out your cornea. This is,
Okay.
we treated it like fucking poison in work, and you can't mess with ammonia.
No, not at all. I always stick by my safety precautions. Rubber gloves, I wear eye goggle or the safety glasses. I do not wear a face shield, as those gases will go up under the face shield and you won't be able to get them out.
The problem with the face mask is that if it sucks the air into filter, it'll actually blow the chemical down in front of your eyes.
Okay. Yeah, I only wear a face mask over my mouth and nose.
I'm just totally against the use of ammonia. I think it's mad.
I will not be demonstrating any ammonia. I'll only be showing you how I do it. I will not be using any chemicals or any liquids, okay? Is everyone happy with that?
Yeah.
So the first technique that I'm going to show is fuming using the ammonia, and I will be very, very careful. So fuming of wood was discovered centuries ago when it was observed that oak beams in horse and livestock barns darkened from the ammonia in animal urine. And the Victorians adapted and refined this process to achieve an aged appearance for woodwork. Here I have an example of the chestnut bowl, that is similar to what I demonstrated earlier, and has been fumed using the ammonia. And I like the fuming process as it gives this lovely aged mellow appearance. It highlights the natural grain of the chestnut, and that's what I really like. It's not like a stain or a paint that is colouring over the wood. It's highlighting the grain and the medullary rays. So you can, lovely grain on this piece of chestnut. And you'll notice that there's that big white patch there, and that's where the sapwood is. There's more tannin concentration in the heartwood, so that is why it is darker. The sapwood has less tannins, so it's therefore lighter. I also have another piece. This is turned out of oak, and again was fumed with the ammonia. And again you can see the difference between heartwood here and sapwood on the other side. The heartwood is significantly darker. And the pith of this piece ran right through here, and the bark was just on the edge. You can just see the bark on this piece. And it gives a nice half and half. You can still see the natural grain and the medullary rays of the oak. And these two were turned green, But if you wanted to give the fuming a go but didn't have the green wood, you can use dry wood. This was a piece of oak. It was kiln dried oak. Then I placed it in the fuming chamber, and I think this was in for maybe 12 hours, and it's gone a lovely dark brown colour. I'm using oak and chestnut because they're high in tannins. If you use woods with low tannin content, they will not react. So I can pass these pieces around, you can have a look at them. Well, you can see it gives a lovely, lovely dark colour.
You mentioned the fuming chamber then. Do you use the fuming chamber for all of your work?
I do for all my fume pieces.
So, yeah.
For fume pieces I use the fuming.
Does that prevent any ammonia gases being in the atmosphere then?
It does. It is a sealed container, I'll show you now.
Yeah.
It's a,
Well, you then got to vent the ammonia.
Do you vent the ammonia outside then?
I do, I always work in a well ventilated area. It is household ammonia that
I
I...
mean, an external vent from your shed, let's say.
No, I just work outside. When I'm dealing with the chemicals, I work outside, then I place a bucket inside my shed or something. But the bucket is sealed. There's no leaking ammonia vapours. And I say it is only household
The
ammonia.
risk with liquid ammonia is ridiculous because you can blind yourself so easily with liquid ammonia. Sorry.
Okay, yeah.
Leave him alone.
I would take the opposite.
Oh no, thank you. No, I never realised
Yeah,
that.
it's extremely dangerous. And I know women use it to bleach their hair and all sorts. Madness.
So it's worth mentioning that the platter that has been handed around is considered food safe. But after the ammonia reaction, the gases, once they have escaped, I would leave the piece off gas. So this has allowed all the gases to escape. It is considered food safe. And that was finished in food safe aisle as well. So when I fume a piece, I put it in an airtight sealed container. So here I have a 5 litre bucket with a lid. And I want to make sure that the lid closes thoroughly. You don't want any ammonia vapours leaking out. I wear all my PPE equipment, rubber gloves, eye protection and a mask, and I always work outdoors.
You should think about swimming goggles.
Swimming goggles.
Swimming goggles will be safe.
Okay. I place...
Don't buy ammonia cleaner at all time to me. They don't know.
So inside the bucket,
Fairly strong. It's 9%.
I place a sheet of kitchen towel inside the bucket. And this is to prevent any condensation or stains from marking the bottom of my piece. I then place, if this was sanded through the grits, but I had no finishing oil applied to it, I place my piece inside the fuming chamber. So I just place it inside the bucket. Then using the household ammonia, this is the household ammonia that I use. And this has got a concentration of 5 to 9%. And you can get it in your local hardware store. I have had problems before getting it in big cities. So I do have some for sale if you are interested in trying this out. I do have some here. But this I pour into the red jug. I pour maybe 50 millilitres, 25 to 50 millilitres of ammonia into the jug. And then I would place the jug inside the bucket. So the piece and the ammonia are not touching. It's the ammonia vapours that react with the tannins inside the chestnut. And this reaction colours the wood and produces that dark colour. I then place my lid on the bucket to make it airtight. And you want to make sure it's properly secure. You don't want any leaking ammonia vapour. And then I would leave it for an appropriate length of time. Now the amount of time varies between piece to piece, even within the same wood species. So it is important to check out, see how the fuming process is going. On this board here, can you see that on the camera? I have, this board has 7 oak discs, or 6 oak discs, that have been fumed in ammonia for varying amounts of time. And this gives you an idea of how much time it needs. So the first disc we have is untreated. Second disc we have is 1 hour. The third disc for 3 hours, and right down to 24 hours. Beyond 24 hours, it doesn't tend to get much darker. And you'll see between 12 and 24 hours, there's not too much of a difference. But I'll show you later how much the ammonia fuming has penetrated into the wood fibres, and you will notice a visible difference. So it gives a great variety of colour change from biscuit brown at kind of 1 to 3 hours, and almost black at 24 hours. Yes?
Does the strength of the ammonia make any difference?
It does. A stronger concentration of ammonia will not necessarily make the piece darker, but it will fume in a quicker amount of time. You cannot legally buy ammonia beyond 10% concentration in Ireland. You can in the US, and you can get weaker concentrations of ammonia, but this is 5 to 9%. It doesn't tend to make much of a difference, the temperature. The reaction will still happen and the piece will still change colour. I've done it in the depths of winter in my very cold shed and it still worked fine. And even in this heat, it's still working.
If you put a bowl in,
Yes?
does the bottom fume, or do you have to turn it over?
That's a very good point. Usually it fumes all the way around the piece, but sometimes I will just flip it over just to make sure that it does get all the way around. But when checking to see how the fuming process is going, I always open the container away from myself. So I open it away to avoid splashing or inhaling the ammonia fumes. And then when the piece comes out, it looks this lovely dark colour. And it may look a little bit dull, but when I apply an oil finish to it, I like to use Danish oil on these fumed pieces, it really does highlight the dark colour. And I like the fuming process as it does highlight the natural grain and character of the wood. Yes?
What happens to the ammonia in the container?
So the ammonia that is left in this jug, I would dispose of down a kitchen sink or down a drain. And it is used as a cleaner, so it's safe to dispose of like this. And once it has been fumed a couple of times, I could do maybe 3 or 4 fumings with the 50 millilitres of ammonia. Once it has done that, most of the ammonia vapour has actually fully diffused, and what's left behind is just water. The ammonia is carried on the water, so that's what's left behind in your jug. So, if you want to...
For the bigger plate,
Yes.
it wouldn't have fitted in there.
I get a 25 litre bucket. This is only a 50 litre bucket. No.
Bigger one.
A bigger bucket, that's all I do. Get a bigger container, a 25 litre bucket or something like that. Yes?
So if you put them in fully sanded, or you put it and you don't sand it anymore after you smelt, or?
Sometimes I would give it a light sand, just with like a 600 grit almost, just in case it has raised the grain of the timber. But usually I place it in fully sanded, and it doesn't tend to raise the grain, but depending on the wood that you use, it can sometimes slightly raise the grain. And different woods will change different colours. The chestnut tends to go very black. The oak, more of a brown colour. And if you ever come across holly and try fume holly, it'll turn almost a vibrant green colour. So it's interesting to experiment with different woods.
Have you tried sealing areas of the wood so that you would get a pattern?
That would be a very good idea. I have tried using masking tape, but it just bled straight through. Maybe if you used like a wax or something, you could create a pattern. But experiment and see what works well for you. And you can create a lot of different effects. Yes?
Does it actually work with kind of chemicals all the way? Sorry. Sorry to do the spot.
I didn't work with ammonia.
I'll be okay.
I'm not keen on it. No, we made the solid side.
It's even worse. It's a word or
Yeah. So here on these discs, I have the cross section. And when you lay them like this, there's not much difference on the surface colour, but when I flip them in half, there is a big difference. One was fumed for 12 hours, the other for 24 hours. And you see the 24 hours has penetrated all the way through the disc. And this is, so for most of my bowls that are at 4 or 5 millimetres, it's penetrated all the way through.
That just shows what it might do to your lungs.
I always have my respirator on and face mask.
I know, but still.
You can see the one that was only in for the 12 hours, it's only penetrated in maybe 2 or 3 millimetres. So if you leave it in for the full 24 hours, the surface colour will be dark, but the penetration will be all the way through the piece. So that's an interesting point. And also, if you wanted to fume a low tannin wood, such as ash, you can do this. Ash does not have very many tannins, but you can add these tannins artificially. The easiest way to do this is to brew a strong cup of tea. Tea is very high in tannins. Then paint your tea solution onto your piece. Allow it to dry completely. If it is not fully dry, the reaction can be slightly blotchy. I then place the tea piece inside the bucket and treat it exactly the same. I would leave it for maybe 2 hours rather than 24 hours, but the tea reaction seems to turn the wood a lot darker very quickly. What you see, again, is highlighted the natural grain of the wood.
Have you ever heard of the notion of using tea bags in vinegar?
I have, yeah. I haven't experimented too much with it, but it does work.
Just tea itself?
Tea, strong cup of tea. Yeah, tannin in tea, then paint the tea onto the wood. You're artificially adding the tannins, and then you place your piece in the fuming chamber. Yes?
The tea will raise the grain, so when you sand.
I would sand it after the fuming using a fine sandpaper or some fine wire wool. Any other questions? Oil. I like to use the Danish oil. It just gives a nice hard wearing finish. And I have here are 2 ash discs that have been fumed in ammonia for the exact same amount of time. They were both in for that 3 hours. And this disc has not had the treatment and the other one has had the tea. And you can see there's such a difference. One's got a lovely golden colour. And I find the tea solution on the ash does give a very, very nice colour. So, does anyone have any other questions before we move on?
Can I make just one last point? Just from your own health and safety point of view, by advising people to use ammonia, you risk them damaging themselves and you being vicariously responsible and open to litigation. You really should be careful with suggesting to people that they use ammonia.
But I don't think he's advising that people use anything more emulsify and harder.
Exactly. What is
Yeah.
one thing you do?
I think, I think with any of these demonstrations, all the person is doing is demonstrating how they do things. We're all responsible for our own health.
Exactly.
Somebody advises you to use a particular chemical.
Like, this is just my technique on fuming. You can go away.
I think we probably thought to have the same thing.
I disagree.
I can pass this tea fume piece around. So, any other questions? Okay, so the next surface enhancement technique that I'm going to show is liming wood. And this uses alkali substances to chemically change the colour of the wood. It is similar to the fuming, but it works very, very well and creates slightly different colours. So here I have an example of a home oak vessel that was treated with the alkali solution. I used lime putty, and it works really, really well to highlight the natural grain of the timber and alter the colour of the piece. And it's got this lovely deep red colour. And I also have a smaller piece. This is made out of oak. And again, you can see the contrast between heartwood and sapwood. And you see it's a slightly lighter brown colour, opposed to the darker hues which you get using the ammonia fuming. And I'll talk you through the process of liming wood. So when I lime a piece, I apply lime putty to the wood. Here on this board, I have several different woods that I have treated with the lime putty. The first disc we have is oak. On one side we have before, and the other side after. You see the oak's got a nice golden colour. The second disc we have is holly, and this, when limed, turns this very vibrant green colour. The third disc we have is chestnut, and that's what I turned the bowl out of. And you can see another really nice golden colour. My favourite wood for liming is the home oak. And it turns a really deep red colour. And it's very, very nice. And the final wood we have is ash. Now the ash was low in tannins, so I did have to treat it with the tea solution and then limed it. And you see it's got a nice weathered grey effect. I'll pass this around, you can have a look at it, and I can show you how I limed the piece.
Did you say, Tom, lime putty?
Lime putty. Putty. I have some here if you're interested. So, you can use different types of alkali, stronger concentrations like caustic soda. You mix the caustic crystals with water, and when put on the timber, will dramatically change the colour of the piece. But I find it raises the grain and it creates such a rough texture. For this reason, I prefer to use the slightly milder lime putty. And this just creates a very nice even colour and does not raise the grain too much. So lime putty is traditionally used for whitewashing old buildings. Whitewash. You mix it with water and then you'd apply it to an old building. Like our house is quite old, so we actually have a lot of lime putty. And we would apply whitewash to the building every 2 years. And it just gets a nice crisp white look.
So just buy lime and
This is actually bought as a lime putty. That's lime putty that you can buy. Now, you can only buy it in a 25-litre bucket. So I do have some, if you are interested, I have some for sale here. And it's kind of hard to get to. There's a couple of places in Ireland that sell it. There's a place down in Youghal in Waterford that sell it. But other than that, it is challenging to get hold of. So, if I have...
May I ask, sorry, are your hands permanently marked by the chemical you use, or will that just wash off?
I always wear rubber gloves when handling chemicals, and
No, but my point is your hands are black at the moment.
the hands are black from the tannins out of the chestnut, which I was turning earlier.
Oh.
So I always wear rubber gloves, and I also have my eye protection as well.
And I'm just worried about yourself, that's all.
Oh yes. So I'm going to apply the lime using a foam brush. The foam brush works very, very well. So you can see lime putty is white, it's almost toothpaste consistency. And you give it a stir, and because there tends to be a layer of water form on the top, I mix it all up and then apply it to the timber. This is an alkali substance, and when treated to high tannin wood, it will change the colour.
what's that wood, Tom?
This is a piece of chestnut, chestnut again, and the chestnut is high in tannins, and this has been fully sanded. And you will see a reaction start almost immediately, but it will go on. So I apply a good thick layer of lime putty.
Which finish do you use most?
Danish oil.
Sorry, which treatment in terms of colouring do you use?
I kind of mix between them. I found out about ammonia fuming first, and then I moved towards the liming wood, and now I'm experimenting with the ebonising. But depending on the darkness that I want, the ebonising creates quite a dark black appearance. Liming, depending on the wood used, can create kind of different varieties of colour. And then the fuming, I find is always very, very reliable. I can always end up with that lovely dark brown colour. So depending on what you're after, I don't know whether you can see on the camera that it's starting to turn a little bit red on the edges there. And that's where it's starting to react with the tannins inside the wood. So at home, I would remove the putty using a copper brush or a damp cloth. I'd use the damp cloth first, and that would just remove the bulk of the putty, And then any remaining putty that is dried onto the piece, I would use the copper brush. So the copper brush that I use is a copper liming brush. And you buy these in the carpentry store, and I think they're about €20. But the copper does not damage the timber. If you work with the grain, the copper does not damage the timber. Or a very fine wire wool as well, will work well. An important step after you've rubbed off the putty is to neutralise it. And this is because the chemical reactions can be ongoing. And this can lead to further darkening and almost a blotchy effect, which is not what I'm after. So the easiest way to neutralise the chemical is to wash it under warm water and rinse off all of the chemical. This will raise the grain of the timber, so it's important to deal with it using wire wool or fine sandpaper. After it's fully dried and silk smooth with either wire wool or sandpaper, I'll apply a Danish oil finish. The Danish oil is nice and hard wearing and create a very nice finish. For today, I'm just going to remove this putty quickly so you can see the reaction that has happened between the alkali substance and the tannins in the chestnut.
With the lime, could you make a paste out of build as lime?
You probably could. It's worth experimenting. It's similar. I don't know how. It would probably work.
It's more a paste than a putty.
It is, but if you can see that on the camera, you can see the reaction that's happened. And typically, I would leave the putty on the wood for about 2 hours. And after that amount of time, the putty has not fully dried onto the timber, so it's easier to remove, but it does go a lovely uniform finish.
It's good for catching trout as well.
So you can see that reaction that has happened, and you can instantly see it's a lovely dark red colour. And unlike stains or paints that coat the timber, they're covering up the natural character of the wood, the natural grain, the medullary rays. The lime putty is actually highlighting them. You can still see the grain through it, and it's got that lovely golden red colour. So I can pass this around and you can have a look. So the lime putty you can only buy in a couple of places around Ireland. There's certain liming places. There's a one in Youghal. If you look up Youghal Stoneware Studios in Youghal, you can find it. But as I say, you can only buy it in a 25-litre bucket. So if you are interested in the lime putty, I do have some here that I've put into a smaller container for you. But it reacts really, really well to the wood. It's normally used for whitewashing old buildings. Sorry? You mix the putty with water and then apply that watered down putty to the building, and that creates a nice putty for whitewashing. For this I prefer to use a stronger concentration. Does anyone else have any questions on liming wood? Okay. Any questions? Yes.
In terms of PPE, the mask, I probably just need to be reminded, it is a special type of filter on the mask.
It is. It is a special type of filter that I use.
Quite expensive.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. I always wear rubber gloves, eye protection, and a mask when using any chemicals, and that covers.
That's before you do anything.
Anything, anything with any chemicals. And when I try to work in a well-ventilated area most of the time. So the next technique that I'm going to show you is ebonising wood. And this technique creates a dark black appearance. Now there's various different methods of creating an ebonised appearance. And this just means turning the wood a black colour that resembles ebony. So here we have several different methods that I've used to create that black appearance. The first disc we have is untreated. These are all made out of kiln-dried oak. The second disc we have is iron sulfate. Now iron sulfate is a powder that you can buy, and when mixed with water and treated to the wood, it reacts again chemically with the tannins in the wood, making it that dark colour. The third disc we have is iron acetate solution, and this is using the vinegar in rusty nails or steel filings, and I'll show you how I make up the solution and how I treat it to the wood later on. This disc that we have is scorching, and this is using flame to ebonize the wood. And this creates a dark appearance, and it also highlights the natural grain of the timber. The bottom two we have, one is a dye, a spirit-based dye, and Indian ink. Now Indian ink is a very, very black ink that you can buy, and gives a very, very even black uniform finish that really does resemble the wood ebony. So I can pass this around, you can have a look at this final board.
Recently, I tried the surfaces of it, and I looked on YouTube, because one guy had done 3 measures of ebonising. One was scorching, one was iron sulfate from the iron filings.
Yes.
And the third one was black marker.
Oh, really?
Marker actually turned out to be
What was it the best way to ebonize?
the easiest.
Yeah.
And the most clearly controlled, because with the liquid ones, it's actually, it soaks in and seep into the wood.
Wood. Yeah.
Whereas with the black marker,
It doesn't
I
steepen.
mean, there was a piece here last month, and it was just using black marker that was used.
Okay.
And then a black over or something, or oil.
So the first one that I'm going to cover is ebonizing using Indian ink. And Indian ink is a very highly pigmented black ink and creates a very, very nice ebonized appearance. I'm going to apply the ink to half of this disc and a spirit-based dye to the other half, just to show you the difference. So this is the Indian ink that I use.
Art shops, isn't it?
Art shops, and you can get it online as well. But as I say, it's very, very pigmented and it's really, really good, really good. So I apply the Indian ink using a paintbrush.
Does it raise the grain?
Not too much. I think it's very, very good, the Indian ink. It creates a very even coat. You can see it's not bleeding at all. And when I apply the stain, you will notice that it bleeds a lot. So it's very good for creating crisp edges. It doesn't penetrate the wood a lot though.
Okay.
Sorry, is that the Indian ink you're applying?
This is the Indian ink that I'm applying to the piece. And then I'll apply a stain to the other half. This is spirit-based dye or stain, and I'll just show you how much this bleeds into the timber.
When you use the line footing, the colour fade out in the sun.
It doesn't tend to. If you finish it properly using an oil or sealant, it doesn't tend to fade. So you can see the dye is a lot less pigmented. It's not as black as the Indian ink. And it does tend to bleed a lot more. On the other half of the disc here, one second. So this was 1 coat of stain, this was 1 coat of ink, this was 3 coats of ink, and this was 3 coats of stain. Typically I would apply 3 coats of the ink or stain, but it just gives a nice uniform black finish. I'll allow this to dry and then I can pass it around. It usually dries relatively quick, the Indian ink, maybe 5 minutes at most it'll be dry, and then I'd apply another coat. To finish the Indian ink, I'd use a Danish oil, and this just gives it a nice hard wearing finish. Does anyone have any questions on ebonising using Indian ink? No questions?
I think that's something that I've used quite a lot, with the exception of the Indian ink.
It's,
I've used everything else there.
it's amazing what you can do to create that ebonised appearance. There's a lot of different methods, and there's a whole lot more than what I'm demonstrating today. But it's cool to experiment, and they all give a slightly different finish. So the final next ebonising method that I'm going to show you is ebonising using flame. Now I will not be demonstrating this for safety purposes, but I will show you how I do it. So this is an ash wall hanging, which I've scorched, using the Shishukiban method. And this is a Japanese technique of charring the wood and then using a brush to rake out the grain and create a texture and appearance. And it works really, really well. The ash is a perfect wood for scorching, as it is a very wide grain. If you use a tight-grained wood, it will not work as well. So I can pass this around and you can have a look. And when you rub your fingers across the grain, you can instantly feel the texture that has been created. So a simple flame ebonising method uses a propane torch. I prefer to use propane torch over MAP gas, as I find MAP gas burns too hot. I know a lot of people do use the MAP gas, but I find the propane, for burning slightly lower, doesn't tend to create that uneven appearance. I would light the torch and then keeping it in even distance away from the piece. I slowly move across. And I would repeat this process over and over and over again, maybe 15 to 20 times to create that textured appearance. And between burnings, I'd use the copper brush. And using the copper brush with the grain will remove the loose soot, the loose char that is developed. And then I'd finish that piece in Danish oil again. Yes?
Sorry, do you use the flame outside the shed or inside the shed?
Outside the shed. Very important.
Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next one. Bye.